My dad, my father, had hopes and dreams that his sons would follow in his footsteps and have a passion for hunting. My father even had a hunting cabin way up in the Adirondack Mountains near Mount Marcy. It was a dump. But he had a passion that we would take up this sport. And my father spent days and weeks teaching us how to hunt, to how to load and aim and shoot a hunting rifle. From the very start, from the very beginning, my heart was not in it. I could not kill anything, let alone Bambi, a deer. I just knew in my heart that I could not do this, that this was not my sport. And what were my parents thinking? My parents, my mom especially, did never let us use even the kitchen blender. But they were putting a loaded hunting rifle into my hands. What were they thinking? What's wrong with this picture? Anyways, on the very first hunting trip with my father, we went way out into the wilderness, into the heart of the Adirondack Mountains. And there in the midst of these woods, I began to sabotage the hunting and our time out in those woods. I began to make all kinds of noises and sounds, movements. I wouldn't sit still to ward off any potential animal that might be harmed, any deer. My father, realizing that I was a nuisance, at that moment did something that my mother would have had a fit. He commanded me and ordered me to go further into the woods alone. So I went further and further into the wilderness. And he said, sit down underneath a tree and just be quiet. So off in the woods I went. I was not thrilled about going into those woods, into that wilderness all by myself. But I have to admit that once I got into those woods alone, I really began to think. Indeed, even in my youthfulness, I began to pray. Began to pray about who I was. And what was I doing in these darn woods wearing orange? Because I hate orange. Indeed, it is often from and in a time of wilderness and deserts and aloneness. It is often from the vantage point of suffering. And I know that many of you have had that experience, that vantage point of suffering, be it from cancer or COVID, or the loss of a loved one. It's often from that vantage point of suffering or wrestling with your demons that we soon discover what's really essential. What's really important, what we are all about. Today's gospel, with the baptismal waters of the Jordan still clinging to Jesus, And with the name of the beloved that had torn apart the heavens still ringing in Jesus' ears, Jesus is driven into the wilds of the wilderness, into the desert for 40 days. And maybe it's the only way to go into the desert or the wilderness in that aloneness is knowing your name is beloved. And we hear in today's gospel that in that desert, in that wilderness and aloneness, like all of us, Jesus is tempted. Temptation. We all know what that's like. But yet for Jesus, it's very different. Jesus is tempted to flee from embracing the weaknesses and frailness of his humanity. To cast off that humanity. We hear in other Gospels that Jesus is tempted to exploit his divinity, to forget his humanity, to turn stones into bread, to jump off cliffs, to have angels catch him. I don't know about you, but I cannot remember as a human being any time that I have turned stones into bread or were caught as I fell onto the ground. It's beyond our pay grade. Yet when Jesus embraces that humanity, when Jesus takes on our humanity, our sinfulness, our brokenness, he comes to know what he's all about. Jesus, at that very moment, learns what it means to be a human being. It's in that desert, in that aloneness, in that wilderness, that our salvation, our redemption has begun. Jesus takes on our humanity, everything that it means to be human, the wonders, the joys, the sorrows, the brokenness, even our sinfulness. And Jesus takes his humanity onto a journey to the cross and beyond. We are also told today that once Jesus embraces that humanity, the weaknesses and the frailness of his human person, at that very moment, the angels minister to him. I think, as we reflect upon our wilderness, we have to be honest, it feels like Lent began last March, confronted with COVID and isolation and social distancing. And as we begin Lent, when we're told it's time once more to have some solitude, to reflect, I think when we look back, we will see how the angels have ministered to us. And maybe that's what our Lent is all about this year. Maybe it's to contemplate how the angels are ministering to us. And when Jesus embraces everything that he is, when he discovers what he is all about in that desert, in the wilderness and aloneness, it is then at that very moment, with his belovedness ablaze, he gets out of that desert and breaks open the gospel, the good news, and announces that indeed the reign of God is no longer a distant reality. It is near. It is now. These 40 days that we're invited into, brothers and sisters, I just want to tell you that this is our opportunity. This is our promise. This is our hope. That those parts of our life that we want and desire to have changed, to go deeper in our relationship with Jesus, to be that disciple on fire, ablaze with the words belovedness in our own ears. This Lent is our opportunity. It truly calls us back. Pope Francis, in his most recent encyclical, has reflected upon this time and invites us to reflect upon this time and upon this Lent. And in this aloneness, in this wilderness, in these 40 days, allow it to call us back to what's essential, what's really important. As Pope Francis calls and tells us, maybe this is a time that's calling us back to the basics. And brothers and sisters, I think we'll soon discover that's what is really important, what is really most basic and essential. It's us. It's the church. It's the community near and far. We'll discover that us is what's most important. And it's this community, it's us, that can go up against the racism that tears our society and our culture and our world apart. It's together, it's us, that can put an end to the discrimination and the attitudes of homophobia, so that we can celebrate God's creative diversity and wonder and discover how rich our community really is. It is in these moments together as us, when we finally discover what's most important in us in this church and community, that we can all together welcome the stranger, not as a stranger, but as a brother and sister. And welcome those who are trying and escaping for freedom, our immigrant brother and sister. Indeed, we can only go into these 40 days. We can only discover what's most important, what we're all about, if we can continually to hear the name beloved ringing in our ears, as we encounter, as we journey into the very mystery of life, and as God calls us all to go beyond, to the cross and beyond, to new and risen life.